On the broadcast is Scott Lucas, who is a professor of international politics, Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Professor Lucas, thank you so much for joining me here on the broadcast. Pleasure having you here. The hostage prisoner swaps have come with a fair share of complexities. We've seen it in the earlier phases as well. Now, so far, seeing how phase one is going, do you see the deal continuing towards phase two as planned? And how volatile or uncertain are things expected to be going forward?
Well, I think, of course, any release of hostages, especially living hostages, and any release of detainees is to be welcomed. And you've seen those expressions of joy, both for the 3 Israelis who have returned home and for the 183 Palestinians who have returned to Gaza today. But at the same time you get that joy, you do have concerns on both sides in terms of, okay, while it looks like phase one is proceeding, will there be this phase two that you talk about, or will we have a return to violence? The reason for that is, and you mentioned these talks that are starting next week, is there's a fundamental here, or two fundamentals. The first is that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, almost didn't even agree phase one because of pressure from the hard right inside his cabinet and his government. Notably the finance minister, Mr. Smotrich, and the national security minister, Mr. Ben-Gvir. Now they demanded that at the end of phase one, that there be no phase two, unless there is a military government in Gaza and ongoing Israeli military operations to police the area. Now, on the other hand, Hamas does not want to give up power in Gaza, even if Israel opposes that, even if the US opposes that. And so Hamas is going to be unlikely to agree in phase two to just simply disappear. There has been a further concern raised this week because of Donald Trump, the new US president, effectively saying he supports the cleansing of the Gazan population, that all of Gaza's 2.3 million people should just leave and go to Egypt or go to Jordan. Now, Gazans don't want that to happen. And Hamas, of course, will not support that. So if you cannot get agreement in phase one on a phase two, what happens at the start of March? And so while welcoming, again, the short-term joy that there are some lives that are being restored, you still have that concern that there will be many more lives that will be lost if we do not get some diplomatic movement in the next 4 weeks.
Professor, now let me come to the Rafa crossing. It has opened after several months. How pivotal is the reopening of this crossing for the next two phases also, which are contingent on the success of this phase one?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's pivotal just from a humanitarian point of view that we've got 50 people who are sick, wounded, many of them with very serious conditions like cancer or heart disease, who are going to cross the crossing immediately. But at the same time this week, aid officials, including from the UN, said there are 2,500 children, let alone adults, who are at the point of death, who need urgently to get out of Gaza to get the treatment they need because Gaza's medical facilities have been destroyed. So I think that opening of Rafa is like, can we see thousands of people getting across to get the vital medical aid? I think it would clearly be an important symbol for what might be possible for a phase two. Look, we're finally getting a move to some type of humanitarian relief, but on its own, it's not really going to affect those political calculations that I mentioned just a moment ago.
Professor, I just want to also take your thoughts a little further. You mentioned about this in your first response, the possible irritants and the sticking points, I would say, in these negotiation talks, which are scheduled between Israel and Hamas in this week. Going forward to discuss stage 2 and stage 3, you mentioned about Trump talking about clearing out Gaza. Then there is Israel. There's the Philadelphia corridor, which has been a sticking point we've seen it all through 2024. The Philadelphia corridor was a major point where Israel did not want to leave it. That still remains to be seen. There was some initial decision that they will back off from the Philadelphia corridor on the 50th day. That will essentially come in phase 2, but there is no clarity on that front. There is a lot that remains variable at this point. What are the chances that stage 2 starts as expected? And if it doesn't start as expected, are we right back to where we were before January 19th?
I hate to make predictions, but I do think that these are very high obstacles that we talk about when you take the combination of the hard right in Israel, not only saying we don't want Hamas in power, but we don't want Palestinians in power in Gaza. When you've got the hard right saying we do not want an agreement for full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and when you have Hamas and many Gazans who are saying, at the very least, we need a Palestinian government, although it's unclear who that might be. And at the very least, we do need that Israeli withdrawal. And if you do not get agreement on that, I think the best you can hope for in phase two is that you defer those questions into phase three. In other words, we get an agreement in phase two to release more hostages, to release more detainees, maybe to get more humanitarian aid, but we just buy ourselves about 6 weeks more breathing space going into mid-April, and then the problem recurs again. Will there be a return to that open-ended war that we saw for 15 months by the Israelis?
I think taking one step at a time, as you mentioned, get to stage two before discussing stage three, especially at a time when you're dealing with parties here which come with such high obstacles to peace. Of course, everyone has their own sides. There's the US, there is Israel, there's internal politics of Israel, there is internal politics inside Palestine. There is a lot. Getting to stage two is more important at this point. Thank you so much for joining me on the broadcast. We'll need to take it one step at a time, 1 week at a time, one exchange at a time, and then keep discussing this as it develops further. That was Professor Scott Lucas joining me from London.